When governments prepare for crises, most of the attention naturally goes to operational readiness. Emergency plans are developed, response teams are trained, then coordination mechanisms are established across institutions. These are, of course, essential elements and foundations of crisis management. However, there's another dimension that is often underestimated, even though it becomes immediately critical when a crisis hits. And that is communication. Whether the situation involves a natural disaster, a public health emergency, a security situation, a cyber disruption, a military attack, or even an economic shock, governments quickly discover that managing the event is only part of the challenge. They must also manage how the event is understood by the public. Citizens need timely and accurate information. They need clarity about what is happening, what it means for them, and what actions they should be taking immediately. Just as importantly, they need confidence that the institutions responsible for the response are actually competent and reliable. In today's information environment, this task has become significantly more complex. Information now spreads instantly across multiple platforms. News organizations report developments in real time. Social media amplifies both facts and speculation. And in some cases, misinformation or even fake news spreads faster than official updates. In this environment, governments cannot rely on slow, carefully staged communication cycles, because delays, inconsistencies, or unclear messaging can weaken even a strong operational response. This is why crisis communication should not be treated as a secondary public relations function. It is a core component of crisis management itself. Crisis management communication shapes public behavior. It influences levels of trust and directly affects how societies respond to uncertainty. Crisis communication is not simply about delivering information. Information alone is not enough, especially for the public. The real objective is to help people make better decisions under conditions of uncertainty and also to keep them safe. When a crisis occurs, most members of the public are trying to answer three basic questions. What has happened? What does it mean for me? And what should I do now? If official sources do not answer these questions clearly and quickly, others will fill in the gap, including media commentary, social media speculation, informal networks, or misinformation and fake news. This is not because people reject official information by default, but because uncertainty creates a demand for interpretation. When that demand is not met, it is met elsewhere. Effective crisis communication therefore serves three practical purposes. First, it establishes a shared understanding of the situation. Second, it encourages appropriate public behavior. And third, it supports trust in institutions at a moment when that trust is under pressure. It is important to emphasize that trust is not a communication slogan. It is an operational asset. When trust is high, public guidance is more likely to be followed. When trust is low, even accurate information may be questioned or ignored by the public. Across different types of crises, 5 principles consistently determine whether communication is effective or not. The first is speed, not in the sense of rushing out incomplete information, but in the sense of acknowledging events early and transparently. In the absence of official communication, uncertainty grows quickly and is often filled by speculation. Early acknowledgement prevents unnecessary confusion. The second is consistency, because public confidence depends heavily on receiving coherent messages across different institutions and spokespersons. When messages conflict, even unintentionally, it creates uncertainty about what is really true. Consistency requires coordination before a crisis occurs, and even during the crisis. The third is credibility. That's not determined by job titles alone. Credibility comes from perceived competence, honesty, and clarity. In many cases, the most effective communicator is not necessarily the most senior official, but the individual the public perceives as most knowledgeable and trustworthy. The fourth is empathy. In moments of crisis, people are not only processing information, they're also processing emotion. Communication that is overly technical or detached can actually create distance between institutions and the public. Acknowledging human impact does not weaken authority, it actually strengthens it. And the fifth is adaptability. Crises evolve and information changes. Effective communication requires the ability to update guidance as new facts emerge and new information becomes available. When changes are explained clearly and honestly, they are generally accepted. What undermines trust is not change itself, but unexplained or inconsistent change. Across all 5 principles, one underlying factor determines long-term effectiveness, and that is trust. Trust is not built in the middle of a crisis. It is built over time through repeated interactions between institutions and the public. Crises do not create trust. They reveal the level of trust that already exists. This is sometimes referred to as trust capital. Institutions that have invested in transparency, in competence, and accountability over time are better positioned to maintain confidence during emergencies and crises. While successful crisis communication varies depending on context, communication failures tend to follow familiar patterns. One of the most common is delay. In many cases, decision makers wait for complete certainty before communicating. However, crises rarely provide complete certainty in their early stages. Delays often allow confusion to spread and reduce the ability of official sources and channels to shape understanding. Another common issue is over-reassurance. In an effort to reduce public anxiety, institutions may present overly optimistic assessments. When reality later proves more complex, this can damage credibility more than if uncertainty had been acknowledged earlier. A third and often more serious issue is misalignment between messaging and behavior. Public trust is highly sensitive to perceived inconsistency. When official guidance is not reflected in institutional or leadership behavior, credibility declines quickly, regardless of how well the communication is crafted. In all cases, the underlying issue is not simply communication technique. It is alignment between information, decision-making, and action. The modern information environment in which governments communicate has changed fundamentally. Communication is no longer linear or centralized. It is distributed, continuous, and highly participatory. Information flows across multiple platforms simultaneously, often without filters or delays. In this context, traditional approaches based on message control are increasingly ineffective. Attempting to tightly manage narratives is rarely sustainable when citizens have access to multiple independent sources of information. Institutions that are consistently accurate, transparent, timely, and responsive become reference points in the information environment. They're not necessarily the only voices, but they are often the most trusted ones and the most reliable ones. In practice, this means shifting the objective from controlling information to earning trust within the competitive information landscape. One of the most important lessons from crisis management is that communication capacity cannot be built during a crisis. It must be developed in advance. This includes identifying and training credible spokespersons before they are needed, establishing coordination mechanisms between agencies, and ensuring that communication teams are integrated into decision-making processes rather than operating separately from them. It also requires sustained communication during non-crisis periods. Trust is not built through emergency statements. It is built through consistent, reliable communication over time. Equally important is ensuring that communication reaches all segments of society. In diverse populations, this includes adapting language, format, and channels so that information is accessible to different communities, including those who may not be reached through traditional media channels. If communication reaches only part of the population, it cannot be considered fully effective. The most effective institutions are those that communicate clearly, early, and consistently. They align their messaging with their actions, they invest in trust before it is tested, and they recognize that communication is not separate from governance, but an essential and integral part of governance. In the end, the central challenge is not simply managing crises themselves, but ensuring that societies are able to navigate uncertainty with confidence, clarity, and shared understanding.